I'm Emma Richardson, 32, and for the past 5 years, my so-called friends have made Forever Single Emma their favorite running joke. Every dinner party, every wedding, every gathering, they'd exchange those pitying glances and whisper about my commitment issues. Last month at Sarah's birthday party, they even started a betting pool on whether I'd still be alone at 35. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly dating someone for 8 months, someone I couldn't reveal because of his high profile position and ongoing cases. Tonight, I'm finally introducing them to David Morrison, the 47-year-old district attorney who's been making headlines for his corruption investigations. The same doll who's currently building cases against 3 of their husband's companies. Their shocked faces when he walks through that door, priceless. But the real surprise comes when they realize their mockery just became their biggest nightmare. Like and subscribe if you've ever had the last laugh on fake friends. Looking back at that faded college photo tucked in my wallet, I can barely recognize the 4 bright-eyed girls we used to be: Sarah, Jessica, Amanda, and me, inseparable roommates at Northwestern. Dreaming of conquering the world together, Sarah was the social butterfly, always organizing parties and events. Jessica was the romantic, sketching wedding dresses in her notebooks even as a sophomore. Amanda was the pragmatist, already planning her post-graduation move to the suburbs. And me, I was the ambitious one, the dreamer who talked about starting my own business while they planned their weddings. We'd made all those promises you make in college. We'd be each other's bridesmaids, godmothers to each other's children, friends, forever no matter what. For a while, it seemed like those promises would hold. We stayed close after graduation, celebrating each other's milestones. Sarah married her college sweetheart at 24 in a lavish ceremony where I gave a heartfelt maid of honor speech. Jessica followed at 25 with a fairy tale wedding that looked like it jumped off Pinterest. Amanda waited until the mature age of 26 before settling down with her finance boyfriend. I was genuinely happy for them. I threw their bridal showers, helped address invitations, and smiled through countless dress fittings. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted as they settled into married life. I was building Richardson marketing consultants from the ground up. While they were picking out nursery colors, I was landing Fortune 500 clients. While they were carpooling to soccer practice, I was traveling internationally for business. At first, they were supportive. Good for you, Emma, living your best life. But as years passed and I remained focused on my career, their support curdled into something else. The comments became sharper. Don't you want to settle down? Became Emma's married to her work. Genuine concern morphed into barely concealed pity, then into something that felt distinctly like entertainment at my expense. By the time we hit our early 30s, I'd built a 7-figure business, owned a downtown loft, and traveled to more countries than I could count. But somehow in their eyes, I was the failure because I didn't have a husband and 2.5 kids. The successful businesswoman became poor Emma, still single. The independent world traveler became Emma, afraid of commitment. They'd never admit it, but I think my independence threatened them. While they depended on their husbands for financial security, I'd created my own. While they'd lost themselves in their roles as wives and mothers, I'd discovered exactly who I was. My success was an uncomfortable reminder of roads not taken, dreams deferred. The worst part, I let their judgment seep into my own self-perception. I started questioning my choices, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was too picky, too focused on work, too independent for my own good. Their constant commentary became the voice in my head during every first date, every relationship that didn't work out. That's why I kept David's secret for so long. I couldn't bear the thought of their scrutiny, their inevitable criticism, their suggestions for how I should handle the relationship. For 8 months, I protected what we had from their toxic influence. Tonight, that protection ends. The screenshots on my phone tell the real story of our friendship's deterioration. I'd kept them, initially for laughs, then later as evidence of just how cruel they'd become. The WhatsApp group chat we'd maintained since college had devolved from genuine support to a platform for their entertainment at my expense. Emma's probably working late again instead of dating, Sarah had written after I missed yet another dinner invitation. The laughing emojis that followed from Jessica and Amanda stung more than the words themselves. Maybe we should set up a dating profile for her, Amanda had suggested. Something like workaholic seeks someone to fit into her calendar between meetings. More laughing emojis. more casual cruelty disguised as concern. But the worst came last Christmas when I'd finally opened up about a relationship that had ended badly. I'd been vulnerable, sharing how the man had criticized my career ambitions and tried to make me feel guilty for traveling for work, instead of support. I got Jessica's response: "Maybe he had a point, you do prioritize work over everything else." The pattern was always the same. They'd deliver their cutting remarks with concerned expressions and sympathetic tones. "We're just worried about you, Emma. You're going to end up alone. Don't you think it's time to compromise a little? You can't have everything. Maybe you're just too intimidating for most men." They turned my strength into my weakness, my independence into a character flaw. Every achievement became evidence of what I was lacking rather than what I was accomplishing. When I bought my loft, they focused on how empty it must feel. When I landed my biggest client, they wondered who I had to share the good news with. When I posted photos from my trip to Japan, they commented on how sad it was that I was traveling alone. The betting pool was the final straw. I'd overheard Sarah organizing it at her last party, thinking I was in the bathroom. $20 says she's still single at 35. I'll take that bet. Amanda had laughed, though honestly, I'm thinking 40 might be more realistic. They'd actually wagered money on my personal life, reducing my worth to entertainment value. What hurt most was how they'd convinced others to see me through their lens. Mutual acquaintances would approach me with that tilted head, pitying expression. "How are you doing, Emma? Sarah mentioned you're still focusing on your career." The pause before "focusing on your career" said everything. They'd rewritten my narrative entirely. The confident, successful businesswoman became the tragic spinster too stubborn to admit she needed love. The independent traveler became the woman so afraid of vulnerability she'd rather be alone. The loyal friend became the cautionary tale. They'd share over wine about what happens when ambition replaces relationships. I tried confronting it once, gently suggesting that their constant focus on my dating life was hurtful. Sarah had gasped dramatically, "We're your friends, Emma. We want you to be happy." But their version of happiness looked suspiciously like their own lives: suburban, settled, dependent. The cruelest irony was that I had been happy. My business thrived because I loved the work. I traveled because I was curious about the world. I lived alone because I enjoyed my own company. But their constant commentary had made me question everything. Made me wonder if I was broken somehow. That's why keeping David's secret felt so necessary. For 8 months, I'd protected what we had from their toxic influence. Our relationship had grown in the safety of privacy, away from their judgment and predictions of failure. David saw me as I really was, accomplished, independent, worthy of love exactly as I am. Now it was time to show them who I really was too tonight. They'd learned that their forever single Emma had not only found love but found it with someone who made their husband. Diaz looked like amateur R. The district attorney who'd been making headlines for months was the same man who brought me coffee in bed and listened to my work stories with genuine interest. Their shocked faces would be worth every moment of mockery I'd endured. The coffee shop receipt is still tucked between the pages of my planner. $4.75 for a large cappuccino on a rainy Tuesday in October. Such an ordinary transaction that led to something extraordinary. I'd been running late for a client meeting, naturally caught without an umbrella when the skies opened up. The coffee shop on 5th Street was the closest refuge, and I ducked inside, dripping wet and frustrated. My laptop bag was soaked, my hair was a disaster, and my silk blouse was practically see-through from the rain. Rough morning. The voice was warm, amused but not mocking. I looked up to see a man in his late 40s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, holding a steaming cup, and wearing a slight smile. He was the kind of handsome that came from intelligence and confidence rather than conventional features, distinguished in a way that made me immediately self-conscious about my bedraggled appearance. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, attempting to wring water out of my hair. "Well, you look like someone who's been wrestling with Mother Nature and lost." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "I've got extra napkins, if you need them. And this storm doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon." There was something about his manner, polite but not overly forward, helpful without being condescending, that made me accept his offer. As I settled into the chair, dabbing at my laptop bag with his napkins, he introduced himself. "David Morrison," he said, extending his hand. The name tickled something in my memory. But I couldn't place it. Emma Richardson, and thank you for the napkins. This bag contains my entire life, professionally speaking. What do you do? His interest seemed genuine, not the polite small talk most people made. I run a marketing consultancy. Today was supposed to be a big presentation for a potential client, and showing up looking like a drowned rat wasn't exactly part of my strategy. He laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Well, if it helps, you don't look like a drowned rat, more like someone who's been caught in an adventure. We talked for nearly an hour, while the rain pounded against the windows. I learned he was a prosecutor. He was modest about the details, and that he'd been working late the night before on a complex case. He asked thoughtful questions about my business, seemed genuinely impressed when I mentioned some of my clients, and never once made me feel like I needed to explain or justify my career focus. You must travel a lot for work, he observed when I mentioned a recent trip to Seattle. I braced myself for the usual commentary about how lonely that must be or how hard it must make dating. Instead, he said, "That sounds incredible. I've always wanted to see more of the Pacific Northwest. What was your favorite part?" We discovered we shared a love of true crime podcasts, independent bookstores, and terrible puns. He told me about his daughter who was finishing her master's degree in social work, speaking with obvious pride about her dedication to helping others. I found myself sharing stories about my business that I rarely told anyone, and he listened with the kind of attention that made me feel truly heard. When the rain finally stopped, I almost didn't want to leave. There was something so easy about talking to him, so refreshing after years of conversations, where I felt I had to defend my choices or downplay my success. "I should probably let you get to your presentation," he said, checking his watch, "though I have a feeling they'll be impressed regardless of your hair situation." As we stood to leave, he hesitated for a moment. "This might be forward, but would you like to have dinner sometime, somewhere with a roof, just in case it rains again?" I found myself saying yes before I'd fully processed the question. There was something about David Morrison that made me want to know more, to hear more of that laugh, to see where those thoughtful conversations might lead. It wasn't until I was walking to my rescheduled meeting that I realized why his name had sounded familiar. David Morrison, the district attorney who'd been making headlines for his aggressive pursuit of corporate corruption cases. The man who'd just asked me to dinner was one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the city. My friends would have had a field day with that information. Of course, Emma would find a way to date someone even more married to his work than she is. I could already hear Sarah saying. The thought made me smile. Maybe that was exactly what I needed. Someone who understood ambition, who respected dedication, who saw my drive as an asset rather than a liability. The theater ticket stubs in my jewelry box tell the story of our careful courtship. 8 months of opera performances, art gallery openings, and late dinners at quiet restaurants where we were unlikely to be recognized. David had explained early on why discretion was necessary. "I'm in the middle of several high-profile investigations," he told me over dinner at a small Italian place downtown. "The last thing either of us needs is for our relationship to become fodder for speculation or, worse, for someone to suggest it's influencing my work." I understood completely. My own business required discretion with clients, and the idea of our personal life becoming public before we were ready felt intrusive. Besides, there was something deliciously intimate about having a relationship that belonged only to us. Our first real date had been to the symphony. David had worn a perfectly tailored navy suit that made his gray eyes look almost blue. And when he'd offered his arm as we walked up the steps to the concert hall, I'd felt something flutter in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. During intermission, he'd leaned over to share his thoughts about the conductor's interpretation of Brahms. And I'd realized how long it had been since someone had engaged with me intellectually like this. "Oh, you know what I love about you," he'd said one evening as we walked along the lakefront after dinner. "You don't diminish yourself to make others comfortable." The comment had taken me by surprise. "What do you mean?" "I've watched you in meetings when you think no one's paying attention. You never apologize for being the smartest person in the room. You don't soften your opinions or downplay your achievements." It's refreshing. I'd been so accustomed to my friend's subtle pressure to make myself smaller, more palatable, that David's appreciation for my full self felt revolutionary. With him, I never felt like I was too much, too successful, too independent, too opinionated. If anything, he seemed To find my ambition attractive, tell me about your biggest win this year, he'd say over dinner, then listen intently as I described landing a major pharmaceutical account. When I traveled for work, he'd text to ask about the meetings, genuinely interested in the details of my presentations and negotiations. In return, he'd share stories from his cases carefully, without revealing confidential information, but with enough detail that I could appreciate the complexity of his work. I learned about the chess game of legal strategy, the patience required to build airtight cases, the satisfaction of seeing justice served. You're like a detective, I'd observed one evening, except instead of solving murders, you're solving financial crimes. Corporate corruption can be just as devastating, he'd replied. Seriously, when executives steal from pension funds or manipulate stock prices, they're stealing from teachers' retirements and college funds. The victims just don't bleed. His passion for justice was magnetic. Here was a man who dedicated his career to holding powerful people accountable, who understood that real power came from using it responsibly. After years of dating men who were either intimidated by my success or competing with it, David's quiet confidence was intoxicating. The physical attraction had developed slowly, intensifying with each stolen moment. The way he'd brush his hand against mine when passing me a wine glass, the warmth of his palm on my lower back as he guided me through crowded spaces, the first time he kissed me outside the art museum after a particularly moving exhibition, I'd felt like a teenager again. I should probably tell you, he'd said one evening about 3 months in, I'm falling in love with you. The declaration had been so matter-of-fact, so characteristically David, that I'd laughed. Probably, definitely, he'd corrected, pulling me closer on the couch in my apartment. Absolutely, completely. By month 6, we'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Weekend mornings in my kitchen, David reading case files while I worked on client proposals, both of us content in our separate but parallel productivity. Evening walks along the river, dissecting everything from local politics to the merits of different coffee brewing methods. My daughter would love you, he'd mentioned one Sunday morning, and I'd felt a flutter of nervous excitement at the prospect of meeting her. Think she'd approve of her father dating a workaholic. She'd approve of me dating someone who challenges me intellectually and doesn't expect me to apologize for caring about my work. That was the moment I'd realized how serious this was becoming. David wasn't just a pleasant distraction from my friend's judgment, he was someone I could build a life with, someone who saw my ambition as an asset, my independence as strength, my success as something to celebrate rather than overcome. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my friends pitied my single status, I was experiencing the healthiest relationship of my life. While they worried about my future, I was falling in love with a man who respected my present exactly as it was. Soon, I'd be ready to share this happiness with the world, but first, I wanted to savor a little longer the look on their faces when they realized just how wrong they'd been about my life. The newspaper clipping had been folded and refolded so many times the creases were wearing thin. David Morrison launches major corporate fraud investigation. The headline that had made me do a double take over my morning coffee 6 weeks ago. I'd been reading about David's work for months. Of course, following his cases in the news with the pride of someone who knew the man behind the headlines. But this particular investigation had caught my attention for a different reason entirely. 3 major construction companies under investigation for bid rigging and tax evasion. The article had reported, sources close to the investigation suggest charges could be filed within months. My blood had run cold as I read the details. The construction industry, government contracts. The timeline matched perfectly with conversations I'd overheard at various dinner parties. Whispered concerns about audits and compliance issues that the husbands had been discussing with increasing frequency. That evening, I'd brought it up carefully with David. I saw the article about your construction investigation, I'd said as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen. He'd paused in his chopping of vegetables, glancing up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What about it? It's just, some of my friends' husbands work in construction, government contracts, specifically. David had set down his knife and turned to face me fully. Emma, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me. My heart had started racing. Okay. Do any of your friends' husbands work for Morrison and Associates, Bradley Construction, or Pinnacle Development? The names had hit me like physical blows. Morrison and Associates. That was Mike's company, Sarah's husband. Bradley Construction, Jessica's husband Tom's firm. I wasn't sure about Amanda's husband, but the way David was looking at me suggested I didn't want to know. Two of them, yes. I'd admitted quietly. David had run his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd learned meant he was thinking through something complex. This is complicated. Are they in trouble? I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. Emma, you know that. His voice had been gentle but firm. But I will say that if your friends' husbands are involved in what we're investigating, then yes, they're likely in significant trouble. The implications had started sinking in. My friends, who'd spent years pitying my single status, were potentially facing their own crisis. Their husbands, who'd provided the financial security that allowed them to judge my independence, might be criminals. How long have you known? I'd asked. Known what? That the men whose wives have been mocking me for years are under investigation by the man I'm dating. David had been quiet for a long moment. I've known who your friends are since our second date. I make it my business to know about the people in my life, but Emma, I want to be clear. This investigation has nothing to do with you or our relationship. These cases were already underway when we met, so this is just cosmic justice. This is what happens when people think they're above the law, he'd said simply. The fact that their wives have been unkind to you is irrelevant to the legal process, but it wasn't irrelevant to me. For years, I'd listened to these women act superior, secure in their married status and their husband's success. They'd made me feel like my independence was a character flaw, like my career focus was compensation for some deep personal failing. Now it turned out that their security was built on illegal activity. Their husband's success was fraudulent, and their judgment of my life was coming from people whose own lives were about to implode. I want to meet them, I'd said suddenly. Emma, not to interfere with your work or get information. I want them to meet you. I want them to see that I'm not the tragic figure they think I am. David had studied my face carefully. You want to introduce me to your friends? I want to introduce you to my former friends. Because after tonight, I think I'm done pretending their opinions matter to me. He'd nodded slowly. I can understand that, but you need to be prepared for the consequences. Once they know who I am, they'll realize what's coming for their husband's good, I'd said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Maybe it's time they faced some consequences for once. That conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, I'd been planning the perfect moment for this revelation. Sarah's birthday dinner had provided the ideal opportunity. A celebration that would quickly become something very different once David walked through that door. Tonight, they'd learn that their forever single Emma had not only found love but found it with the one man who could destroy their comfortable little world. The elegant dinner party invitation had arrived 2 weeks ago. Cream cardstock with gold embossing that screamed expensive taste. Join us for Sarah's 32nd birthday celebration at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where they'd held Jessica's promotion dinner last year. Where they'd cornered me with concerned questions about my biological clock, while their husbands discussed business deals that were apparently illegal. I'd stared at that invitation for a full 10 minutes before texting back my acceptance. For the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to one of their gatherings. You're sure about this? David had asked when I'd shown him the invitation that evening. I've never been more sure of anything. The planning had been meticulous. David would arrive 30 minutes after me, enough time for them to settle into their usual rhythm of subtle condescension. I'd let them get comfortable. Maybe allow them to make a few comments about my perpetual singleness, build up their confidence. What should I tell them about your work? I'd asked David. The truth, I'm the district attorney. I prosecute corporate crimes. His smile had been wry. Let them draw their own conclusions about what that might mean for their husbands. I'd practiced the introduction in my head dozens of times, casual but significant. I'd like you all to meet David Morrison. He's the district attorney. Then I'd watch as recognition dawned, as they realized exactly who they were dealing with. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. I wouldn't have to say anything vindictive or cruel. David's mere presence would communicate everything they needed to know about how wrong they'd been about my life. His professional reputation would speak for itself. Part of me feels guilty. I'd admitted to David a few days before the dinner. They have no idea what's coming. They've had years to be kind to you. Emma, you're not responsible for their choices. And you're not responsible for their husbands' crimes. He was right, of course, But there was still something delicious about the anticipation, the knowledge that everything was about to change for years. They'd held the power in our friendship dynamic. They were the married ones, the settled ones, the ones who'd figured it out while I was still searching. Tonight, all of that would be revealed as the illusion it had always been. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a black dress that was professional but elegant, expensive but not flashy. I wanted to look successful but not like I was trying too hard. David would wear his navy suit, the one that made him look like exactly what he was, a man of substance and authority. Remember, I told him, you don't have to say anything specific about the cases, just be yourself, let them connect the dots, and if they ask me directly about their husbands, tell them you can't discuss ongoing investigations. The fact that you can't deny anything will be answer enough. The final touch would be my demeanor, no smugness, no obvious satisfaction, just the quiet confidence of a woman who'd finally found her equal, who was ready to introduce the man she loved to people who'd spent years telling her she wasn't worthy of love. I'd imagined their faces so many times, the initial shock of seeing me with someone at all, the dawning recognition when they heard David's name and realized who he was, the growing panic as they understood what his presence might mean for their own lives. Sarah would probably try to laugh it off at first, make some joke about Emma and her successful men. Jessica would go pale, thinking about Tom's increasingly stressed phone calls about work. Amanda would immediately start calculating how to distance herself from the situation. But the best part would be watching them realize that I'd known all along. That I'd sat through months of their pity and condescension while dating the man who held their futures in his hands. That their poor Emma was actually the one woman in the group whose life wasn't built on illegal foundations. Are you nervous? David had asked that morning as we'd had coffee together in my kitchen. Nervous? No. Excited? Absolutely. Tonight, the tables would finally turn. Tonight, they'd learn that their judgment of my life had been laughably wrong, and tonight, I'd finally stop caring what they thought of me at all. David's business card sat on my dresser like a small white rectangle of power. Simple, official, David Morrison, District Attorney, County of Cook. No fancy graphics or elaborate fonts, just clean, authoritative text that would mean everything to my friends' husbands. Second thoughts, David asked from the doorway, watching me stare at the card. I turned to look at him, immaculate in his navy suit, and felt my resolve strengthen. None whatsoever, but that wasn't entirely true. Standing in my bedroom, putting the finishing touches on my makeup, I could feel nervous, energy coursing through me. Not nervousness about introducing David, I was proud to be with him. The anxiety came from knowing that tonight would irrevocably change everything. Emma. David's voice was gentle as he stepped behind me, his hand settling on my shoulders. You don't have to do this to prove anything. I'm not doing it to prove anything to them, I said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. I'm doing it to prove something to myself, which is that I deserve better friends. For months, I'd been questioning whether I was being too sensitive about their treatment, whether I was imagining the subtle cruelty, whether their concern was genuine even if poorly expressed. Tonight would settle that question once and for all. Their reaction to David would reveal their true character. What if they surprise you? David asked. What if they're genuinely happy for you? I considered this possibility as I fastened my earrings. Then I'll owe them an apology for doubting them. But David, these are women who made a betting pool about my love life. I don't think gracious happiness is in their repertoire. He was quiet for a moment, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The investigation aside, I need you to know something. Whatever happens tonight with your friends, whatever they say or do, it doesn't change how I feel about you. The unexpected vulnerability in his voice made me turn around to face him fully. What do you mean? I mean that I've seen how their judgment affects you, even when you try to hide it. And I need you to know that my opinion of you isn't dependent on their approval. You're remarkable exactly as you are, successful, independent, strong. Whether they see that or not doesn't change the truth. The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened slightly. This was why I'd fallen in love with him. David saw me clearly, valued me completely, never asked me to be smaller or different to accommodate others' comfort. Thank you, I said, reaching up to straighten his already perfect tie. I needed to hear that. Good. Because after tonight, you might need to remember it. We'd planned the timing carefully. I would arrive first, alone, giving them opportunity to settle into their usual dynamic. David would join us for dessert, appearing just as they'd gotten comfortable with the evening's rhythm. The contrast would be stark, from their pity party about my singleness to the reality of my relationship with one of the city's most powerful men. "Remember," I said as we prepared to leave, "you don't owe them any explanations about your work. Professional discretion is completely appropriate, and you don't owe them any explanations about why you kept me secret," he replied. Privacy in a new relationship is normal. But we both knew tonight wasn't about normal relationship dynamics. Tonight was about power, respect, and the settling of old scores. My friends had spent years positioning themselves as the successful ones, the ones who'd figured out life while I stumbled through my career-focused existence. In a few hours, they'd discover that their success was built on criminal activity while my independence was built on legitimate achievement. Their husbands were under investigation by the man I was sleeping with. Their comfortable superiority was about to crumble. "One last question," David said as we reached the door. "Are you doing this for the right reasons?" I thought about Sarah's condescending smile when she'd organized the betting pool, Jessica's pitying head tilt whenever my dating life came up, Amanda's suggestion that maybe I was too intimidating for most men, years of small cuts disguised as concern, years of making me question my own worth. "I'm doing this because they need to learn that their opinions of my life matter exactly as much as my opinion of theirs," I said, "which is to say, not at all." David nodded, understanding. "Then let's go give them an education." Shay Laurent hummed with the kind of understated elegance that my friends loved. Crystal glasses catching candlelight, soft jazz playing in the background. Servers gliding between tables with practiced discretion. The reservation confirmation on my phone showed a table for 6, though I noticed only for place settings when the hostess led me to our usual spot near the window. "Emma." Sarah's voice carried that particular tone she used when she was playing the gracious hostess. She stood to embrace me, her smile bright but somehow calculating. "You look wonderful. That dress is gorgeous." The compliment felt like an assessment. The way she took in my appearance with slightly too much attention. Sarah herself was perfectly put together as always, blonde hair in a salon fresh blowout, designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, jewelry that caught the light at every angle. "Happy birthday," I said, handing her the carefully chosen gift, a leather-bound first edition I'd found at an antiquarian bookstore. "I hope you love it." Jessica and Amanda rose to greet me as well, their hugs feeling perfunctory. I noticed the quick glance they exchanged, the subtle communication that had become their trademark whenever I arrived at these gatherings. "So," Amanda said as we settled into our chairs, "flying solo tonight." "I see." There it was, less than 2 minutes before the first reference to my single status. I smiled serenely, unfolding my napkin. "Actually, someone will be joining us for dessert. He's finishing up some work." The reaction was immediate and electric. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Jessica leaned forward slightly. Amanda's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "Someone," Sarah's voice pitched higher. "Emma Richardson has a someone." "I do indeed." I kept my tone light, casual, as if discussing the weather. "Well, this is exciting." Jessica clapped her hands. "Together, tell us everything. How did you meet? What does he do? Is it serious?" The barrage of questions came exactly as I'd expected. They were like sharks scenting blood in the water, hungry for details they could pick apart later in their private messages. "We met at a coffee shop," I said, accepting a glass of wine from the server. "He's in law, and yes, it's quite serious law." Amanda perked up. "Corporate law, criminal law, personal injury." "Criminal law, actually, prosecution." I watched as they processed this information, already mentally cataloging ways to be concerned about this choice. A prosecutor meant long hours, stressful cases, probably not much money compared to corporate law. "That must be so stressful," Sarah said with her trademark sympathetic expression. "All those criminals and court cases, and prosecutors work such terrible hours." "He manages just fine," I replied mildly. "But what about work-life balance?" Jessica pressed. "I mean, with your travel schedule and his court schedule. When do you even see each other?" The familiar interrogation had begun. They couldn't simply be happy that I was happy. They had to find the problems, the complications, the reasons why this relationship was doomed to fail like all the others in their narrative. "We make it work," I said. "He's actually very supportive of my career. He finds my work fascinating." This seemed to catch them off guard. They were used to men being threatened by my success, intimidated by my independence. The idea that someone might actually appreciate those qualities was foreign to their worldview. That's nice. Amanda said carefully, and he's okay with you traveling so much for work. He encourages it. He says watching me excel at what I love is one of the things he finds most attractive about me. The silence that followed was telling. They exchanged another one of their glances, this one tinged with something that looked suspiciously like confusion. Their narrative about my life, career-obsessed woman too independent for love, was cracking slightly. Well, Sarah said finally, we can't wait to meet this paragon. The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. They'd already decided that any man who claimed to support my career was either lying or settling. In their experience, successful relationships required compromise, usually by the woman. Actually, I said, checking my phone as if surprised. He just texted, he'll be here in about 10 minutes. The energy at the table shifted palpably. Jessica immediately reached for her compact to check her lipstick. Amanda smoothed her hair. Sarah straightened her posture. Even in their skepticism, they wanted to make a good impression on my mysterious boyfriend. 10 minutes. Sarah's voice had a slight edge. Should we order him something? Does he eat meat? Any allergies? He'll be fine, I assured her. He's not difficult to please. As we waited, they peppered me with more questions, fishing for details that might give them ammunition for later criticism. What kind of law did he practice exactly? Where did he go to school? How old was he? Each question felt like a probe, searching for weaknesses in my happiness. I answered vaguely, truthfully but without elaboration. Yes, he was older than me. Yes, he was established in his career. Yes, he had his own place. No, we weren't rushing into anything. It's just so unlike you, Amanda observed, twirling her pasta around her fork. Keeping someone's secret for so long. Usually you're an open book about your dating life. Maybe I learned that some things are worth protecting, I said quietly. The comment hung in the air, loaded with implications they couldn't quite grasp. But they would soon enough. In just a few minutes, they'd understand exactly why I'd kept David Morrison's secret, and exactly how wrong they'd been about every assumption they'd made about my life. My phone buzzed with a text from David, walking in now. Are you ready for this? I typed back, more than ready. Sarah was in the middle of a story about her latest home renovation when the hostess approached our table, leading a distinguished man in a navy suit. My friend's conversation died mid-sentence as they took in David's presence, the confident bearing, the expensive suit, the unmistakable aura of authority. Ladies, I said, rising from my chair with a smile, I'd like you to meet David Morrison. The wineglass slipped from Sarah's fingers, as if in slow motion, crystal shattering against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the restaurant. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like spilled blood, but Sarah didn't even notice. Her eyes were fixed on David with an expression of pure shock. David Morrison, she repeated slowly, as if testing the words, the David Morrison, that would be me. David said with his characteristic calm smile, extending his hand to each of them in turn. You must be Sarah, happy birthday. Emma's told me so much about you all. The handshakes were mechanical, their faces cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching horror. I watched Jessica's complexion go from flush to pale in seconds. Amanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The district attorney, Amanda whispered, more to herself than to him, among other things. David replied graciously, taking the chair the server had quickly brought over. But tonight I'm just Emma's boyfriend, hoping to finally meet the friends she's talked about for so long. The word boyfriend seemed to physically impact them. Jessica made a small choking sound. Sarah's hand flew to her throat. Amanda grabbed her water glass and drained it in one gulp. This is Jessica started, then stopped, clearly unable to finish the sentence. Unexpected, Sarah finished weakly. I hope you don't mind me joining you for dessert, David continued, seemingly oblivious to their distress. Emma mentioned it was a birthday celebration, and I wanted to meet the people who are so important to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they'd positioned themselves as the important ones in our friend group, the married ones, the settled ones, the ones whose opinions mattered. Now they were sitting across from a man who held more real power than their husbands could ever dream of. How long have you two been? Amanda's voice trailed off as she gestured vaguely between David and me. 8 months, I said. cheerfully. Can you believe I managed to keep it quiet for so long? 8 months. The timeline was sinking in, and I could see them mentally calculating all the dinners where they'd pitied my single status. All the conversations where they'd speculated about my inability to maintain a relationship. 8 months, Sarah repeated faintly. We wanted to keep things private while we got to know each other, David explained. Emma's discretion was one of the many things that attracted me to her. Another direct hit, these women who had built their identities around sharing every detail of their lives, who treated privacy as suspicious behavior, were being told that discretion was attractive. And what is it you do exactly? Jessica asked, though her tone suggested she already knew Anne was hoping desperately to be wrong. I'm the district attorney for Cook County, David said simply. I prosecute criminal cases, primarily white-collar crime these days. Corporate fraud, tax evasion, bid rigging, that sort of thing. The color drained completely from Jessica's face. Amanda's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Sarah looked like she might be sick. That sounds very, Amanda struggled. For words, important, it is, David agreed. We're seeing more and more sophisticated financial crimes. Construction companies that manipulate government contracts. Businesses that hide assets to avoid taxes. It's fascinating work, really. Following the paper trails that these criminals think they've hidden. Each word was like a small bomb exploding at the table. I watched my friends' faces as they processed the implications of what David was saying, what his presence at this table meant for their own lives. Are you working on anything particularly interesting right now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's smile was pleasant but professional. I can't discuss ongoing investigations, of course, but I will say that we're in the final stages of several major cases. The arraignments should be quite newsworthy arraignments, Jessica echoed weakly. Criminal charges, David clarified helpfully. When we've built our cases and we're ready to formally accuse defendants of crimes. The server appeared to clean up Sarah's broken wine glass. But none of us paid attention. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut. My friends sat frozen, processing the reality that the man I'd been secretly dating was the same man who could destroy their husbands' lives. Emma, Amanda said suddenly, could we speak with you privately for a moment? Oh, that's not necessary, I said brightly. David doesn't mind hearing whatever you want to say. We don't have secrets. The emphasis on the word secrets wasn't lost on anyone. These women who had spent years analyzing every detail of my life, who had treated my privacy as evidence of failure, were now desperate for privacy themselves. Actually, David said, checking his watch, I should probably step outside and return a few calls. The DA's work is never done. He stood, leaning down to kiss my cheek. It was wonderful meeting you all. I hope we'll see much more of each other. As he walked away, the silence at our table was deafening. My friends stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, trying to reconcile the forever single Emma of their narrative with the woman who had just introduced them to one of the most powerful men in the city. Emma, Sarah said finally, her voice shaking. What the hell is going on? I smiled, picking up my wine glass with steady hands. I'm sorry. What do you mean? I thought you'd be happy for me. Isn't this what you've been wanting? For me to find someone special? The look of dawning realization on their faces was everything I'd hoped for and more. Jessica's phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up with a text from Tom, even upside down. I could see the beginning of the message. Is that really the daw with Emma? We need to talk now. She grabbed the phone quickly, but not before Amanda caught sight of the screen. The color drained from Amanda's face as the implications hit her. Our husbands know him, Amanda whispered, stating the obvious with the tone of someone announcing a death. Of course they do, I said pleasantly, cutting into the chocolate torte the server had just placed in front of me. David's quite well known in certain circles. Sarah's hands were shaking as she fumbled for her own phone. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I'm always honest with you, Sarah, sometimes brutally so. Did you know? Her voice was barely audible. About our husbands, about whatever he's investigating. I took a deliberate bite of dessert, savoring both the rich chocolate and the moment. What exactly are you asking me? Don't play games. Jessica's voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Are Mike and Tom in trouble? That's really a question for David, isn't it? Though I'm sure your husbands could give you some insight into their business practices. Amanda's phone had joined the chorus of buzzing devices. She glanced at the screen and went even paler. Emma, please, we've been friends for years. If you know something, friends. I set down my fork and looked at each of them in turn. Is that what we are? Because friends don't usually organize betting pools about each other's love lives. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak, but no words came out. You heard about that, Jessica said finally. I heard you organizing it, at your last party. When you thought I was in the bathroom, I kept my voice level, conversational. $20 on whether I'd still be single at 35, Amanda. Thought maybe 40 was more realistic. Emma, we were just, Sarah started. Just what? Just having a laugh at my expense. Just making my personal life into entertainment. Amanda's phone buzzed again. This time she answered it. Her voice a harsh whisper. Not now, Richard. I can't leave, I'm at dinner. David reappeared at our table, sliding back into his chair with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in any situation. Sorry about that, crisis at the office. What kind of crisis? Amanda asked immediately, then caught herself. I mean, if you can say, oh, just coordinating with federal agencies. When you're dealing with multi-million-dollar fraud cases, there are a lot of moving pieces. He smiled at me warmly. Emma understands. She's very patient with my irregular schedule. Jessica's phone buzzed again, then Sarah's. The table looked like a command center under siege. Electronic alerts coming from every direction. Popular evening. David observed mildly. It's nothing. Sarah said quickly, declining the call. Actually, I said, I think their husbands are trying to reach them. Mike, Tom, and Richard have been having some work stress lately. Haven't you noticed? The look of betrayal that crossed Sarah's face was almost satisfying. Almost. How do you know about Richard's work stress? Amanda demanded. Because I've been listening to you complain about it for months. Late night phone calls, canceled vacations, mysterious meetings with lawyers. I may have been the single one, but I wasn't deaf. David listened to this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating social experiment. The spouses of people under investigation often experience significant stress. He said conversationally, the uncertainty can be quite difficult. People under investigation. Jessica repeated weakly, hypothetically speaking, of course, David added with a slight smile. Sarah's phone rang again. This time she answered it, stepping away from the table with a muttered excuse. Through the restaurant's ambient noise, I could hear Mike's voice raised in panic. Though I couldn't make out the words, Emma, Amanda leaned forward urgently. Whatever you think we've done to deserve this. Deserve what, exactly? I introduced you to my boyfriend. I thought you'd be happy for me. Don't be naive. You know exactly what this looks like. It looks like the woman you've pitied for years has a relationship with someone who values her. Exactly as she is, someone who finds her success attractive rather than threatening. Someone who respects her independence instead of trying to diminish it. Jessica was staring at David with something approaching horror. How long have you known about Emma's friends? Since our second date, David replied honestly. Emma mentioned her friend group, and I make it my business to know about the people in my life. And you didn't think that was relevant information to share? Amanda's voice was rising despite her obvious efforts to control it. Why would it be relevant? I asked. David's investigation has nothing to do with our relationship. These cases were already underway when we met. But you knew, Sarah said, returning to the table with tears in her eyes. You've known for months that our husbands were in trouble. And you said nothing. Said nothing about what? About David's work. He doesn't discuss his cases with me. And I wouldn't expect him to, but you knew the connection. I knew that the husbands of the women who've spent years mocking my life choices were potentially facing consequences for their own choices, and honestly, I found that rather poetic. The naked honesty of my statement seemed to shock them more than anything else I'd said. They'd expected denials, apologies, explanations. They hadn't expected me to admit that I'd found satisfaction in their discomfort. This is revenge, Amanda whispered. No, I said calmly. This is justice. Revenge would be me actively working to harm you. Justice is just letting the natural consequences of everyone's choices play out. David's hand found mine across the table, his fingers warm and steady. I think perhaps we should call it an evening, he said gently. As we stood to leave, Sarah grabbed my arm. Emma, please, whatever problems we've had as friends, this is bigger than that. Our families are facing the consequences of your husband's decisions, I finished. Just like I've been facing the consequences of mine, the difference is my decisions were legal. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened as the full weight of the situation hit her. You can't be serious about this. After everything we've been through together, everything we've been through, I turned to face her fully, no longer caring about maintaining politeness. You mean like the time you told your book club that I was afraid of commitment because I wouldn't settle for the wrong person? Or when Jessica suggested to our college reunion committee that maybe I shouldn't be on the planning committee because I wouldn't understand what married women needed? Jessica flinched. That's not what I meant. Or when Amanda told her mother-in-law that I was one of those career women who thinks she doesn't need anyone. Yes, Amanda, she repeated that conversation to my mother at the grocery store. The blood drained from Amanda's face. I was just trying to explain. Explain what? Why your successful friend was such a disappointment. Why my independence was something to be pitied rather than respected. David had remained quietly beside me, but I could feel his steady presence. His unwavering support giving me courage to finally say everything I'd held back for years. But the betting pool, I continued, my voice gaining strength, that was the masterpiece. $20 on whether I'd still be alone at 35. You turned my personal life into a gambling opportunity. Sarah fumbled in her purse, pulling out a folded cocktail napkin with shaking hands. The writing was faded but still legible. Names, dollar amounts, and odds on my romantic future written in her careful script. You kept it, I said, almost impressed by her audacity. It wasn't. We didn't mean. Sarah's voice broke. Didn't mean what? To be cruel, to turn your friend into a joke, to make my personal happiness a source of entertainment. We were worried about you, Jessica protested. You were so focused on work, so independent, we thought I needed to be more like you. I interrupted. Dependent on someone else for financial security, willing to compromise my dreams for the sake of balance, content to live smaller lives so the men around me could feel bigger. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. That's not fair, Amanda said. Weakly, fair, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you what's not fair. What's not fair is spending your 30s having your life choices constantly questioned by people who claim to love you. What's not fair is being made to feel broken because you're successful and independent. What's not fair is having to hide your happiness for 8 months because you know your friends will find ways to tear it down. David stepped slightly closer, his presence a reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Every dinner, party, every girls' night, every casual conversation became an opportunity for you to express your concern about my life. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To have people who are supposed to support you constantly suggesting that your strengths are actually weaknesses? We never said your career was a weakness. Sarah protested. Double quotes. No, you just implied that it was compensation for personal failures. That my success was hollow because I didn't have a husband to validate it. That my travel and achievements were just ways of avoiding the real work of relationships. Jessica was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. We love you, Emma. We've always loved you. Love doesn't look like judgment. Love doesn't look like pity. Love doesn't look like organizing betting pools about someone's personal life. I pulled my phone out and scrolled to our group chat. The thread that contained years of subtle poison disguised as friendship. Emma's probably working late again instead of dating, I read aloud. Maybe we should set up a dating profile for her. Don't you think it's time to compromise a little? You can't have everything. Maybe you're just too intimidating for most men. Each quote hit them like a physical blow. They'd never expected their casual cruelty to be documented, catalogued, remembered. Those were taken out of context, Amanda said desperately. Were they? Because the context I remember is 3 married women systematically undermining their single friends' confidence for years. But we wanted you to be happy. Sarah was sobbing now. No, you wanted me to be like you. You wanted me to need what you needed. To want what you wanted. To validate your choices by making the same ones. My happiness was threatening because it looked different from yours. David's hand found mine, steady and warm. Emma, he said quietly, we should go, but I wasn't finished. Years of suppressed frustration were pouring out, and I couldn't stop now. The most ironic part, I continued, is that while you were all so concerned about my empty, sad, single life, I was building something real. Something based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. While you were pitying me, I was falling in love with someone who values everything about me that you've spent years trying to change. And it just happens to be the man investigating our husbands, Amanda said bitterly. Yes, it does, and do you know what that tells me? It tells me that while I was choosing a partner based on character, integrity, and shared values, your husbands were making choices that put them on the wrong side of the law. The silence that followed was profound. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dinner service. Other diners unaware of the friendship dying at table 12. We can't be friends anymore, I said finally, the words feeling both devastating and liberating. Not after tonight. Not after understanding how little you actually thought of me. How little you respected my choices. How willing you were to turn my life into your entertainment. Emma, please. Sarah reached for me again. No, I stepped back, David's presence giving me the strength to maintain boundaries I should have set years ago. We're done, and honestly, we should have been done a long time ago. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Amanda's broken whisper behind us. What are we going to do? I didn't turn around to answer for the first time in years. Their problems weren't mine to solve. The arrest warrant was folded neatly in David's jacket pocket. A single sheet of paper that would transform Amanda's world tomorrow morning. He'd mentioned it casually as we walked to his car, the way someone might mention picking up dry cleaning. Richard Kellerman, conspiracy to commit fraud and tax evasion. He'd said simply. The warrant was signed this afternoon. We'll execute it tomorrow at his office. Amanda's husband, the man who'd been having those mysterious late-night phone calls, the cancelled vacations, the sudden interest in offshore accounts that Amanda had mentioned in passing during their recent arguments. Does she need to know tonight? I'd asked. She'll know soon enough. Now, 24 hours later, I was watching the news coverage from my office. A cup of coffee growing cold in my hands as reporters stood outside Kellerman and Associates, describing the dramatic arrest of prominent contractor Richard Kellerman in an ongoing corruption investigation. My phone had been buzzing all morning, ignored calls from Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda. Text messages that had evolved from pleading to angry to desperate as the reality of their situation became undeniable. Sarah, Emma, please call me back. Mike's lawyer says the arraignment is next week. Jessica, I know you're angry with us, but Tom is talking about taking a plea deal. I don't know what to do. Amanda, they arrested Richard at his office. The news trucks are outside our house. My kids are asking questions I can't answer. I deleted each message without responding. Their crisis wasn't my responsibility, and their sudden desire for my friendship felt hollow and motivated by desperation rather than genuine affection. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they'd positioned themselves as the successful ones, the women who'd figured it out while I stumbled through my career-focused existence. Sarah with her influential husband in construction management, Jessica married to a government contractor, Amanda with her real estate developer spouse. They'd built their identities around their husband's success, defined their worth through their marriages, judged other women based on their ability to land a man. Now those same men were facing federal charges, and their wives were discovering that their security had been built on illegal foundations. David had been careful not to discuss details with me, maintaining the professional boundaries that made him the kind of man worth respecting. But the news coverage filled in enough gaps to understand the scope of the investigation. A coordinated scheme spanning nearly 5 years. The anchor was reporting. Prosecutors alleged that the defendants manipulated bidding processes for city contracts, inflated invoices, and used shell companies to hide profits from tax authorities. 5 years, the same 5 years my friends had spent pitying my single status, suggesting I lower my standards, hinting that my independence was compensation for personal failure. While they'd been concerned about my empty life, their husbands had been emptying city coffers. My assistant knocked on my office door, interrupting my thoughts. Emma, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's an old friend, but she seems pretty upset. I didn't need to ask who it was. Send her in. Amanda appeared in my doorway, and I barely recognized her. The polished, put-together woman from dinner 2 nights ago had been replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red and swollen. Emma. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. I'm assuming this isn't a social call. She collapsed into the chair across from my desk, her composure cracking completely. They arrested Richard yesterday, at his office, in front of his employees. The local news was there, I saw. Our assets are frozen, the house, the cars, everything. My kids' college funds are gone because apparently they were funded with stolen money. She was crying now. Ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I don't know how to explain this to them. I don't know how to explain that their father is a criminal. I felt a flicker of sympathy for her children, innocent victims of their father's choices. But for Amanda herself, the woman who'd spent years suggesting I was too intimidating for most men, I felt nothing. What do you want from me, Amanda? I want to know if there's anything you can do, if David could, if there's some way to what? Make the evidence disappear, convince the DA to ignore crimes because we used to be friends. I don't know, she screamed, then immediately lowered her voice, glancing toward the door. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. Here's what you do, I said calmly. You get a good lawyer. You cooperate with the investigation if you're asked. You figure out how to rebuild your life based on legitimate income instead of stolen money. That's it, that's all you have for me. What did you expect? That I'd somehow use my relationship with David to interfere with a federal investigation? That I'd risk his career and reputation to help the husband of someone who organized betting pools? About my love life, she flinched. At the reminder, we were stupid about that. We were jealous, maybe. You seemed so confident, so sure of yourself. We felt like failures next to you. So you decided to make me feel like the failure instead? Yes, the admission was barely audible. God help me. Yes, at least she was being honest now. Too little, too late, but honest. Amanda, I'm sorry about your children. I'm sorry they're going through this. But your husband's choices aren't my responsibility, and neither are the consequences. But if you could just talk to David. David doesn't discuss his cases with me, and I wouldn't ask him to compromise his integrity even if he did. The fact that you think I would shows how little you understand about either of us. She stared at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman I actually was rather than the caricature she'd created in her mind. You're not going to help me. I'm not going to help you escape the consequences of choices you didn't make. But Amanda? The fact that you came here asking me to corrupt my relationship and compromise my partner's ethics tells me everything I need to know about why our friendship was doomed from the start. She stood slowly, defeat written in every line of her body. I guess I deserve that, probably, but your kids don't deserve what they're going through. Focus on them, not on trying to undo what can't be undone. After she left, I sat in my office, watching the news coverage continue. 3 families destroyed by greed and entitlement. 3 women who judged my choices discovering that their own choices had been catastrophically wrong. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from their opinions, their judgments, their constant suggestions that my life was somehow lacking. Their approval had been built on foundations as fraudulent as their husbands' businesses. I was done caring what they thought of me. I was done entirely. That evening, I found myself digging through the box of old journals I kept in my bedroom closet. Buried beneath college notebooks and work planners was a leather-bound diary from 3 years ago, its pages filled with my increasingly frustrated observations about my so-called friends. The entry I was looking for was dated after Jessica's baby shower, where I'd spent the afternoon listening to thinly veiled criticisms disguised as concern. I flipped through the pages until I found it, written in my own careful handwriting. Another gathering where I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Jessica's shower was beautiful, but every conversation seemed to circle back to my single status. Don't you want what Jess has? When are you going to settle down? Maybe you're being too picky. By the end of the afternoon, I felt like there was something fundamentally wrong with me for being content with my life. Why do their questions make me doubt myself so much? Why do I leave these events feeling smaller than when I arrived? Reading my own words from that time was like looking at a different person, someone who had internalized their judgment, who had started to believe that maybe they were right about my life being incomplete. The next entry was even more telling. Lunch with Sarah today. She spent 20 minutes analyzing why my last relationship didn't work out, suggesting that maybe I'm emotionally unavailable or too independent for my own good. When I mentioned the promotion I'm up for, she said, "That's great, Em, but don't you think success is empty without someone to share it with?" I wanted to ask her if her husband's success would be empty without her, but I didn't. Why don't I stand up for myself? Why do I let them make me feel like my achievements don't matter? Page after page revealed the same pattern, my growing awareness of their toxicity coupled with my inability to protect myself from it. I'd documented every slight, every backhanded compliment, every suggestion that my life was somehow lacking. But I'd also documented my own gradual erosion of confidence, the way their constant commentary had infected my self-perception. Met someone interesting at the Morrison account meeting today. Read an entry from 9 months ago, intelligent, accomplished, seems genuinely interested in my work. But I find myself already anticipating what the girls would say, probably that he's too old, too serious, too career-focused. Why am I letting their imaginary opinions influence my real life? That entry was written the day after I'd met David at the coffee shop. Even then, before our first date, I'd been protecting what we might become from their toxic influence. The progression was clear in black and white. Years of slowly accepting their narrative about my life, allowing their judgment to become my inner critic, questioning every choice through the lens of their disapproval. I'd been so focused on maintaining these friendships that I'd lost sight of whether they were worth maintaining. The most damaging entry came from last Christmas. After I'd opened up about the relationship that had ended badly, told the girls about Marcus and how he criticized my travel schedule, said I was married to my work, instead of support, Jessica actually agreed with him. Maybe he had a point. You do prioritize work over everything else. I feel like I'm drowning. These people who claim to love me keep confirming that there's something wrong with the way I live my life. Am I really too independent, too focused on my career? Maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken somehow. Reading that entry now, I wanted to reach back through time and shake that version of myself. The man who'd criticized my ambition wasn't worth a moment of doubt. My friend's agreement with his assessment said everything about them and nothing about me, but I'd let their judgment seep into my bones, influence my dating choices, make me second-guess every instinct. I'd started approaching relationships defensively, apologizing for my success, downplaying my achievements to make men more comfortable. Until David with him. I'd never felt the need to apologize for who I was. He'd seen my ambition and been attracted to it, not threatened by it. He'd understood my independence and respected it rather than trying to erode it. For the first time in years, I'd felt like my full self was not only acceptable but desirable. The contrast was stark when I looked at more recent entries, written after David and I had become serious. David says he loves watching me work, loves seeing how passionate I am about my projects. He asks thoughtful questions about my clients, remembers details about presentations I'm nervous about. When I travel, he texts to ask how the meetings went, genuinely interested in the outcomes. Is this what it feels like to be with someone who actually respects what you do? And later, David mentioned that his ex-wife used to complain that he was married to his work. He said he realized he wasn't married to his work. He was passionate about justice. And he needed a partner who understood that passion rather than resenting it. I've never had someone understand the difference before. The journal entries painted a clear picture of transformation. From a woman who'd internalized others' criticism to someone who'd remembered her own worth. From someone who apologized for her success to someone who celebrated it. From someone who diminished herself to make others comfortable to someone who insisted on being seen fully. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Emma, please. I know we messed up. But Mike's arraignment is tomorrow. I need my friend. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, you need a lawyer, not a friend, and you had a friend. You just spent years treating her like a project to be fixed rather than a person to be respected. I closed the journal and put it back in the box. Those entries were artifacts of a different time, when I'd allowed other people's insecurities to become my own self-doubt. I wouldn't make that mistake again. The woman who'd written those painful, confused entries was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who chose partners who celebrated her rather than trying to change her, who had learned that the right people would love her exactly as she was. My friends had spent years suggesting I needed to change to find happiness. Instead, I'd found happiness by finally accepting that they were the ones who needed to change, or be left behind. David found me on my balcony that evening, journal still in my lap, staring out at the city lights. He'd let himself in with the key I'd given him months ago, a gesture of trust that had felt monumental at the time. Rough day? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. Enlightening day. I gestured to the journal. I was reading about who I used to be. He glanced at the open pages, then back at my face, and I'm grateful that person is gone. David was quiet for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote this for you earlier, he said, after Amanda left your office. The note was written on his official letterhead, but the words were entirely personal. Emma, watching you stand up to toxic people who've spent years diminishing you has been one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed. Your strength, your boundaries, your refusal to let guilt manipulate you into compromising your values. These are the qualities that made me fall in love with you in the first place. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is cruel. It's necessary. I read it twice, then looked up at him. You've been dealing with their desperation too, haven't you? Jessica's husband called my office today, wanted to discuss the situation, which is prosecutor speak for offering to bribe me. What did you do? Referred him to the ethics board and added attempted corruption of a public official to his potential charges. The matter-of-fact way he said it made me smile despite everything. This was who David was. Unshakable in his integrity. Impossible to corrupt or compromise. The same qualities that made him an excellent prosecutor made him an incredible partner. They don't understand you at all, I said. No, they don't. They see someone in a position of power and assume he can be bought, influenced, or manipulated through personal relationships. They don't understand that integrity isn't negotiable. Sarah called my office 3 times today. She wants to explain why they treated me the way they did. Do you want to hear the explanation? I considered this. I think I already know. They were insecure about their own choices, so they needed to make mine seem wrong. My independence threatened their dependence. My success highlighted their lack thereof. My contentment with my life made them question their own, and now their world is falling apart. And they want the strong, independent friend they spent years mocking to save them. David reached over and took my hand. You know you can't save them, even if you wanted to. I know, and honestly, I don't want to. Is that terrible? It's human. They made choices about how to treat you and they thought they held all the cards. Now the cards have shifted. And they want to change the rules. You deal with this in your work, don't you? People who think consequences shouldn't apply to them. Every day, white-collar criminals are particularly good at believing they're above the law. That their status or connections should protect them from accountability. Like thinking their friend's boyfriend would compromise an investigation to help them. Exactly like that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city settle into evening. Finally, David spoke again. Can I tell you something? That might sound strange. Always, I'm proud of you, for standing up to them, for protecting what we have, for refusing to let guilt override your judgment. These past few days have shown me exactly who you are under pressure, and I like what I see. The words settled into my chest like warmth. For years, my friends had suggested that my strength was a liability, that my independence was off-putting, that my success was compensation for personal failure. David saw those same qualities as assets. I was reading my old journal entries. I said from when I was still trying to maintain those friendships, I was so confused, so willing to doubt myself because they kept telling me something was wrong with my life. What changed? You partly, but mostly I just got tired of apologizing for being happy. You should never have to apologize for that. They made me feel like I should. Like my contentment was somehow an indictment of their choices, like my independence was a judgment of their dependence. Their insecurity isn't your responsibility. I know that now. I should have known it years ago. David squeezed my hand. We learn when we're ready to learn. You weren't ready to see their toxicity until you had something healthy to compare it to. Is that what this is? Healthy, Emma? You've never once asked me to be smaller so you could feel bigger. You've never criticized my work schedule or suggested I care too much about justice. You've never made me feel like my passion was a character flaw or my dedication was compensation for personal inadequacy. Because those things are what make you who you are. Exactly. And your ambition, your independence, your success, those things are what make you who you are. Anyone who asks you to diminish those qualities isn't asking you to be better. They're asking you to be less. The simple truth of it hit me like a revelation. For years, I'd been surrounded by people who wanted me to be less successful, less independent, less confident, less satisfied with my own life. They disguised their requests as concern, but the message was always the same. Be smaller so we can feel bigger. I don't want to be less, I said quietly. Good, because the woman I fell in love with is magnificent exactly as she is. As we headed inside, David's note still clutched in my hand. I realized something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the woman who questioned her own worth based on others' opinions. I was no longer willing to shrink to make others comfortable. My friends had spent years trying to change me. Instead, they'd lost me entirely. And for the first time, that felt like their loss, not mine. The text message arrived at 6:47 a.m., jolting me awake with its desperate urgency. Emma, I know you hate us right now, but please call me. Mike's lawyer says he might go to prison for 10 years. My kids don't understand why Daddy can't come home last night. I'm begging you, whatever we did wrong. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. We need help. Sarah. I stared at the screen, noting the timestamp. Sarah had been awake before dawn, probably hadn't slept at all since Mike's arraignment yesterday. The desperation in her message was palpable. But it was the kind of desperation that came from consequences finally catching up, not from genuine remorse. My phone buzzed again. Jessica, this time. Emma, Tom is talking about taking a plea deal. He says it's the only way to avoid federal prison. Our lawyer bills are already over $50,000 and this is just the beginning. I know we weren't good friends to you, but please, if there's anything David could tell us about what they have, anything at all, I'll do anything. The messages kept coming throughout the morning, each more frantic than the last. They'd moved from apologies to bargaining to outright begging. What struck me most was how quickly they'd abandoned any pretense of caring about our friendship. This wasn't about missing me or regretting their treatment of me. This was about what I could do for them. By noon, I had 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Sarah had even tried reaching out through LinkedIn, as if a professional networking site would somehow carry more weight than her increasingly hysterical personal messages. The final straw came when my assistant buzzed me around 2 p.m. Emma, there are 3 women in the lobby asking to see you. They say they're old friends, but security is getting a bit concerned about their intensity. I looked out my office window and saw them huddled together in the building's marble lobby. Sarah was pacing, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. Jessica kept checking her phone obsessively. Amanda sat slumped in a chair, staring at nothing. They looked like what they were, desperate women whose comfortable lives had just imploded. Tell security I'll be down in a moment. I took the elevator to the lobby, where their heads snapped up the moment they saw me. Sarah immediately rushed forward, but I held up a hand to stop her. Ladies, this is my workplace. If you want to have a conversation, we can do it civilly, or I can have security escort you out. Emma, thank God. Sarah breathed. We've been trying to reach you all day. I know. I've been ignoring you all day. The bluntness of my statement seemed to shock them. They'd expected me to at least pretend politeness, to maintain the social niceties that had always governed our interactions. We need to talk, Jessica said, her voice shaking. Please. Just 5 minutes. Fine, but not here. I gestured toward the coffee shop next door. And you need to understand something going in. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to ask David for information, favors, or leniency. I'm not going to compromise his integrity or mine to solve problems you didn't create. We found a corner table where their breakdown would be less public. The moment we sat down, the floodgates opened. Mike might go to prison, Sarah said without preamble. 10 years. Emma, our kids will be in college by the time he gets out. Tom's talking about a plea deal, Jessica added. The government wants him to testify against the others. He's choosing between betraying his business partners and going to federal prison. Richard's already been indicted, Amanda said quietly. The house is going into foreclosure. I had to take the kids out of private school. I'm looking for a job for the first time in 15 years. They waited for me to respond with sympathy, advice, or offers to help. Instead, I sipped my coffee and watched them with detached interest, and I said finally, and we need your help. Sarah exploded. You're dating the prosecutor. You have to know something. Anything that could help our families. I know that your husband's committed crimes and are facing the consequences of those crimes. I know that David is doing his job with integrity and professionalism. That's all I know. And it's all I need to know. But surely he's mentioned something. Jessica pressed. Some detail about the case. Some weakness in their evidence. Are you asking me to spy on my boyfriend for you? The question hung in the air like an accusation, which, I realized, was exactly what it was. "We're asking you to help your friends," Amanda said weakly. "My friends," I repeated slowly. "The same friends who spent years mocking my life choices. The same friends who organized betting polls about my personal life. The same friends who made me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me for being successful and independent." "We said we were sorry," Sarah cried. "No, you said you were desperate. There's a difference. What do you want from us?" Jessica asked. "What can we do to make this right?" "Nothing. You can't make it right because this isn't about you making amends. This is about consequences. Your husbands broke the law, and now they're facing justice. Your comfortable lives were built on stolen money, and now you're facing reality. So you're just going to watch us suffer?" Amanda asked bitterly. "I'm going to live my life with someone who respects me, supports my ambitions, and would never ask me to compromise my integrity for his benefit. You should try building relationships like that sometime." The cruel precision of my words hit them, like physical blows. For the first time, they were seeing me as I really was. Not the accommodating friend who absorbed their criticism, but someone with boundaries, standards, and self-respect. "This isn't you, Emma," Sarah said desperately. "This cold, vindictive person, this isn't who you are. You're right, this isn't who I used to be. I used to be someone who let friends treat her badly because I was afraid of losing relationships that weren't worth keeping. I used to doubt myself because people I cared about made me feel small. That person is gone, because of him," Jessica said accusingly. "David changed you." "Yes, he did. He showed me what it felt like to be respected, valued, and loved exactly as I am. He helped me remember my worth, and now I can't unsee how badly you've treated me for years." I stood to leave, but Sarah grabbed my wrist. "Emma, please, our children are innocent victims of their father's choices. I'm sorry for them, but they're not my responsibility, and neither are you." As I walked back to my office, I felt the final threads of those friendships snap. They weren't seeking reconciliation or offering genuine apologies. They were seeking access to power they thought I could provide, willing to use our history to manipulate me into betraying the man I loved. Their desperation had revealed their true character more clearly than years of subtle cruelty ever could, and I was finally, completely done with all of them. The newspaper headline was impossible to miss: 3 local executives indicted in $12 million corruption scandal. Below it, smaller text detailed the charges against Michael Harrison, Thomas Bradley, and Richard Kellerman: conspiracy, fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. The kind of charges that came with mandatory minimum sentences and destroyed reputations permanently. I was reading the article over my morning coffee when David emerged from my bedroom, already dressed for what would undoubtedly be a media circus at the courthouse. "Big day," I observed, holding up the paper. "The biggest in a while. The press conference is at 10. Arraignments start at 2. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I feel nothing. No satisfaction, no sympathy. Just nothing." "That's probably healthy. Is it weird that I'm not gloating?" 6 months ago, if someone had told me this would happen, I think I would have been gleeful about the justice of it all. David considered this as he buttered his toast. Revenge fantasies are always more satisfying than reality. Real consequences are just sad and messy and complicated. He was right. There was nothing triumphant about watching 3 families implode. Even when those families had treated me badly, the wives I'd once called friends were now dealing with frozen assets, legal bills, and the social shame of being married to criminals. Their children were innocent victims of their father's greed. "The kids are the real tragedy here," I said. "They always are in cases like this. White-collar crime doesn't just hurt faceless institutions, it destroys families, communities." "Trust." My phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. I glanced at the screen and immediately deleted it without reading. Whatever desperate plea or final attempt at manipulation it contained, I didn't need to see it. "They're still trying to reach you. Constantly. Sarah sent 14 messages yesterday. Jessica called my office pretending to be a potential client. Amanda showed up at my gym. Jesus, are you considering a restraining order?" "I shouldn't have to. They'll eventually realize I'm not going to help them and move on to their next desperate strategy." David's expression darkened. "Emma, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." The serious tone made me look up from the newspaper. What? Tom Bradley's lawyer approached mine yesterday. He's shopping a story to the media about our relationship. My blood ran cold. What kind of story? The usual garbage. That you used our relationship to get information about the investigation. That I shared confidential details with you. That the whole thing is a conflict of interest that should invalidate the cases. That's insane. You've never told me anything about your work. I know that, you know that. But desperate people do desperate things. And Bradley's facing 20 years in federal prison. His lawyer thinks creating a scandal around our relationship might provide reasonable doubt. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. So they're going to try to destroy us. They're going to try. It won't work. We've been scrupulously careful about maintaining professional boundaries, but it's going to be unpleasant for a while. The irony was staggering. My former friends, who had spent years judging my personal life, were now trying to weaponize my personal life to save their husbands. The women who had mocked my independence were now trying to destroy the relationship that had given me strength. What do? We do nothing. We live our lives, ignore the noise, and let the legal process proceed. The evidence against these men is overwhelming and has nothing to do with our relationship. But the media attention will be unpleasant but temporary. Emma, I've been a prosecutor for 15 years. I've faced down organized crime figures, corrupt politicians, and multinational corporations. I'm not going to be intimidated by 3 desperate wives and their lawyers. His calm confidence was reassuring, but I could feel anxiety building in my chest. What if people believe it? What if they think I really did? The people whose opinions matter know better, and frankly, anyone who would believe that story without evidence isn't someone whose respect is worth having. I thought about my colleagues, my clients, my real friends, the people who had supported my success and celebrated my happiness with David. None of them would believe I'd compromise my integrity or his for the sake of petty revenge. They're really going to try to paint me as some kind of manipulative woman who seduced you for information. Probably. It's the only card they have left to play. After years of pitying me for being single, they're going to argue that I'm too cunning and attractive for my own good. David laughed. The first genuine humor I'd heard from him all morning. The inconsistency is pretty remarkable. What about your career? Could this actually hurt you professionally? Not if we handle it right. I've already spoken with my supervisors about our relationship. They're satisfied that there's no conflict of interest. The timing alone exonerates us. These investigations were already underway when we met. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in days, I answered it. Emma, thank God. I know what you're planning, I said without preamble. The media strategy, the character assassination, the attempt to make our relationship into a scandal. Silence on the other end. It won't work, Sarah. David's integrity is unimpeachable. The evidence against your husbands is overwhelming, and all you're going to accomplish is destroying whatever small amount of sympathy I might have had left for your situation. Emma, please, I'm done, all of you, completely done. And if you think attacking my relationship is going to somehow save your marriages, you're even more delusional than I thought. I hung up and immediately blocked her number, then Jessica's. Then Amanda's. Feel better? David asked. Actually, yes. For the first time since this whole thing started, I feel like I'm fighting back instead of just enduring. Good, because we're going to win this thing, Emma, not because we're lucky or connected, but because we're right. Justice isn't always convenient or comfortable, but it's worth defending. As David left for the courthouse, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the woman who absorbed others' judgment and internalized their criticism. I was someone who stood up for herself, who protected what mattered, who refused to be diminished by people who had never deserved her friendship in the first place. Let them try to destroy what David and I had built. They'd only prove how little they understood about love, integrity, or the difference between justice and revenge. The engagement ring caught the light from my office window. A simple but elegant solitaire that somehow managed to capture every beam of afternoon sunshine. 6 months had passed since the trials ended. Guilty verdicts across the board. Sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years in federal prison. The media storm around David's and my relationship had lasted exactly 2 news cycles before more interesting scandals captured public attention. David had proposed 3 weeks ago. Not with grand gestures or public displays, but with the same quiet confidence that had attracted me to him in the first place. We'd been cooking dinner together, discussing our plans for the weekend, when he'd simply said, "I think we should get married." "Do you?" I'd replied, stirring the pasta sauce. "I do. I love our life together. I love who you are, who I am when I'm with you, who we are together. I want to make it permanent." He'd pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for weeks, he admitted later, waiting for the right moment. Not a moment of high drama or manufactured romance, but a moment that captured the essence of what we were. To people who had found in each other exactly what they'd been looking for. The ring itself was perfect, classic, elegant, substantial. Without being ostentatious, like David himself, it was quietly impressive, beautiful without needing to announce its worth to the world. "Emma," my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your friend Marcus is here for lunch." Marcus Chen was my newest friend, a fellow entrepreneur I'd met at a business conference during the height of the media attention, while my former friends were trying to destroy my reputation. Marcus had approached me with genuine admiration for how I'd handled the situation. "I read about what you went through," he'd said over coffee after his panel on sustainable business practices. "The way you protected your integrity while everyone around you was losing theirs, that takes real character." We'd bonded over shared experiences of building businesses from nothing, the challenges of maintaining authenticity in professional relationships, and the satisfaction of succeeding on our own terms. Marcus had introduced me to his girlfriend, Lisa, a brilliant doctor who understood the demands of ambitious careers. Together, we'd formed the kind of friendship I'd thought I'd had with Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda, based on mutual respect rather than judgment. Support rather than competition. The engaged woman Marcus grinned as he entered my office. "How does it feel to be officially off the market?" "Like exactly what I always wanted," I said, admiring the ring again. "David and I are thinking a small ceremony, neither of us wants a big production." "Smart. Lisa and I are considering elopement when we get engaged. All that wedding planning seems like a distraction from the actual marriage." This was what real friendship looked like, I'd realized. Celebrating each other's choices rather than questioning them. Supporting each other's happiness rather than undermining it. Respecting each other's decisions rather than trying to change them. "Have you heard anything from the terrible trio?" Marcus asked as we walked to lunch. I shook my head. Radio silence since the sentencing. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to save them, probably for the best, definitely for the best. The aftermath had been swift and brutal for my former friends. Sarah had moved back in with her parents, taking the kids with her while Mike served his 10-year sentence. Jessica had gotten a job as a receptionist at a dental office, struggling to pay legal bills and support herself while Tom did his 7 years. Amanda had simply disappeared, moved to another state, according to mutual acquaintances. Trying to rebuild her life away from the shame and scandal. I felt sorry for their children, but for the women themselves, nothing. They'd made their choices, to judge rather than support, to tear down rather than build up, to prioritize their own comfort over genuine friendship. The consequences of those choices weren't my responsibility. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as we settled into our favorite restaurant. "About ending those friendships?" "None whatsoever. I should have done it years earlier." I meant about the whole situation, the investigation, the trials, the media attention. I considered this carefully. No regrets. If anything, I'm grateful. It showed me who David really is under pressure. Someone with unshakable integrity who never asked me to compromise myself for his benefit. It showed me who I am when I stop trying to please people who don't respect me, and it cleared out relationships that were toxic so I could make room for better ones like ours. Marcus said with a grin, "Like yours, like David's colleagues who have become genuine friends, like my new clients who appreciate my work, instead of judging my life choices." The truth was, my life had improved dramatically since cutting ties with Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda. My business was thriving. Turns out that confidence and self-respect were attractive qualities in a consultant. My relationship with David had deepened without the constant background noise of criticism and judgment. I'd made new friends who celebrated my successes rather than finding fault with them. "You know what the best part is?" I said to Marcus as we reviewed our menus. "I'm not angry anymore. For years, I carried around this low-level resentment about their treatment of me, this constant defensiveness about my choices. Now I just don't care what they think of me." Freedom. Exactly, freedom to be exactly who I am without apology or explanation. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Dinner tonight. I want to hear about your day and tell you about mine. I love you, simple, genuine, supportive, the kind of message I'd never gotten from any of the men I dated before him, the kind of relationship I'd never imagined was possible. The grin on your face suggests that's from the fiancé, Marcus observed. It is, and you know what, 3 years ago my friends would have analyzed that text message for hidden meanings. Suggested he was being too available or not romantic enough, found some way to make me doubt what we have, and now I just appreciate having someone who loves me exactly as I am. As we ordered lunch, I caught my reflection in the restaurant window. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, engaged to a man who respected her completely, surrounded by friends who supported her unconditionally. She looked nothing like the woman who had once questioned her own worth based on others' opinions. To new beginnings, Marcus raised his water glass in a toast. To finally understanding the difference between people who love you and people who judge you, I replied, clinking my glass against his. The engagement ring caught the light again, and I smiled. In 6 months, I'd be Emma Morrison, married to a man who saw my independence as strength, my ambition as attractive, my success as something to celebrate rather than endure. My former friends had spent years suggesting I needed to change to find happiness. Instead, I'd found happiness by finally refusing to change for anyone who didn't deserve the real me, and that, I thought as Marcus launched into a story about his latest business venture, was the best revenge of all, living well, authentically and completely on my own terms.